Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG, and as always, it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Remakes, or remasters, or reimagination. Most of the time, these kind of titles seem relegated to an almost bargain bin style feel, where it appears that those creating the game have all the sense of someone buying condoms at a 99-cent store. So to be completely open with you, when Resident Evil 2 Remake was announced, I didn't quite know what to make of it, other than the fact that it was the most unoriginal name for a title, and yet somehow still about 20 times smarter than the Red Faction game, where they thought saying Remars Turd was a good idea. Resident Evil 2 Remake is out January 25th for the suggested retail price of $60 for the PC, PS4, and Xbox One. Let's see how it did, shall we? As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Resident Evil 2, The Remake. Finding Carmen Sandiego, demon doggos are the best doggos, and an evil so evil, it can't be contained to even one story. Also, one caveat is Capcom has some heavy embargo rules on this. Just be aware some things cannot be talked about until after the release. There are some additional game modes that I can discuss, but I can't go into any details about them. Let's begin. Of course, we are going to start with graphics. Now, it's rare here that we see so much care and attention go into a remake. Hell, it's rare we see games themselves that are brand new have this many bells and whistles, all of which thankfully can be adjusted in the PC version, from various levels of anti-aliasing all the way down to almost all of the effects, which allows you to get a better solution and maybe that one extra FPS out of the PC you just bought. Resident Evil 2 Remake's largest change that many old fans will instantly notice is the flexible third-person camera, removing the oddity of prior Resident Evil games and this title's original blueprint, and instead replaces it with something that, while not perfect, is infinitely more refined. It helps the game world really feel far more organic than it used to, offering a new angle on old experiences, and at the same time seamlessly intertwining new locations and experiences with it. Now, that's one thing that Resident Evil 2 Remake actually does in spades. It has a large number of new locations, puzzles, items, uses, and effects. Not enough that those who played the game won't recognize the game world, but you'll also have a more modern feel, and that's a problem that I think many games that are remasters actually can't get past. But to me, it's easily the lighting engine that is so expertly done and shows the game new and old. And this is on top of course, excellent SSAO and a depth of field, but it has an incredible volumetric lighting system that combines to really drive home the feeling that this is a modern title. Take, for instance, the first time you come down a hallway in the mansion and the way your light throws off the objects, sending everything into this crazy dance, and then as you come around a corner, your light begins to fade out as lightning outside illuminates a zombie that apparently really wants in. The shadow work is very well done here, as well as all of the other effects. Now, all this allows for you to really bask in some of the environments and the character models as well. The mains, of course, look pretty stunning with high detail texture throughout, as well as some of the best facial capture I think I've ever seen. Watching the trucker at the starting chew the hamburger on a rainy open road was one part amazement, one part reminder that I fucking hate watching people masticate. It really does step it up, like the subtle smirk of a bad guy thinking they just figured it all out, to the utter look of shock on a character's face the first time they really get an idea of what they're all up against. There's an emotion here that just wasn't able to be done on the prior systems, and an emotive feel to almost everything that actually occurs between characters. Special effects like fire and per limb damage are done incredibly well when you use your bullets like a bunch of teeth and chew off enemy body parts. You can blow off limbs, cripple them, cut them, and blow enough holes in their heads it looks like a bunch of predator mouths just sprouted from it. This also does lend itself greatly to the horror feel of Resident Evil, as the gore is incredibly detailed, maybe too much so for some people. Take, for instance, a specific enemy you fight as a mini-boss through the game that fights his own transformation forcibly, and you can feel it going on throughout his entire body, and you can actually see the terror even as the virus takes hold. Interestingly enough, the game was in development somewhere around Resident Evil's development as well, and you can see some of the shared ideas in the technology. For example, the hair and the way it moves on the characters and the enemies looks almost identical to Resident Evil 7 at times, and in most places this adds a almost hellish look, especially to some of those female zombies. And it's that mixed with the atmospheric layering of architecture that really allows you to reflect a story about zombies with past items like ancient typewriters, bringing the past into the future, and allows old shade lamps and high-tech helicopters to exist in the same world. In fact, I would say it elevates it. Each time you save onto the typewriter, you actually start to get the feeling this is nothing more than someone else reading the notes another person left prior to them on the only item available, like each save is a chapter in the character's passing life. Nevertheless, Resident Evil doesn't come out purely inoculated to remake and remaster syndrome. First, while the game does have excellent texture work, there are a couple hit and misses here or there. One character in particular looks like a damned PS3 game. I'm not lying. I reset the save game thinking he had not loaded his face textures in, and maybe that actor just happens to have a face with all the detail of a piece of glossy photo paper, but it looked weird, and set against the backdrop of such excellence everywhere else, it was instantly noticeable. Also, there are some noticeable issues with the lighting engine, and it's especially evidenced on rough materials that still have some shiny qualities that shimmer and dance a bit on some settings. This was more noticed on the PC and not a ton on the consoles, and might have something to do with the ray tracing system that it's using. However, for a lot of users, that's not going to be the biggest issue. The biggest is going to be that the HDR is not mapped very well. It looks off on all the versions, while the PC was a bit easier to dial in than the consoles later on. Again, this might be patched out, but I absolutely see a lot of people complaining regardless of using HDR or not and having a hard time really nailing the contrast and feel. It is workable and it does look good, but there is some fiddling that has to be done. Now, when it comes to performance, first, the game uses an unlocked FPS on all the consoles. I don't get why anyone would ever do this anymore. It doesn't gain anything, and instead you can see a noticeable rocking back and forth from 30 FPS up to 50s on the PS4. I would have absolutely loved to have that FPS locked at 30 and for them to have worked on their final image, but you can't win them all. While both the PS4 and the Xbox One are outputting 1080 usually, the Xbox One does seem to bounce lower at times. PS4 Pro and Xbox aren't actually native 4K from what it looks like. It's a little bit hard to tell because of how much anti-aliasing there is there, and it blurs out some of those details. It still looks really good though. When it comes to the premium versions of these consoles, they do seem to be almost locked at 60. There were a couple little drops here and there, but actually, very smooth gameplay there. But of course, on the PC, it is a whole other ballgame. The game runs incredibly well, and anyone with a 1070 or above is going to be able to go in there and raise the resolution and a lot of the settings to levels that they haven't been able to on a lot of other games and still get above 60 FPS. 1440p seems like it's probably going to be an excellent sweet spot for anything below a 1080 card though, and some of the settings are almost barely noticeable, so you can drop some of them to get up to that 60 if you want. It really does have phenomenal performance for a game engine that's throwing this much lighting at you. A lot of folks see a game and think, oh man, it's a closed off environment. It should get 240 frames a second in order to me lunch. That's not actually how development works. And high detailed lighting and shadows eat up power far more quickly than a lot of people probably would expect. If this had been a remaster, you never know how it could have gone. It's like pretending you'll never age and then seeing James Spader Blacklist right after watching the movie Stargate. But as a remake, while not perfect, Capcom shows its chops, and for the most part, the improvements, changes, and downright additions to the detail is all worth it. Even on the base consoles, the game looks incredible. It does have some minor issues, no doubt, but usually those are transitory, leaving you with one hell of a good-looking game. And that brings us to sound, music, and voice.
Wait there.
Tie her hands.
Why are you doing this?
Shut up. Tie her. Okay then. You tie her up now or she dies.
And I think today we're going to do voice first. So this is really well done. In fact, it's particularly nuanced for a Resident Evil game. Since many locations, new moments, and story elements are added, that means a great deal more voice is added, and it all fits in organically, even though the voice actors have all been replaced from the originals. However, I do think they do an incredible job with a bit less of that emotional effect seesaw moments that existed in the past titles. This actually caused me to want something that's very rare for me. I sort of wish they talked more. We become accustomed to the mumblers and shamblers of gaming today, where every 7 seconds the main guy launches into some tirade about having no ammo, wanting some potato chips, or commenting about what's on a radio nearby. Resident Evil 2 Remake goes the opposite and may just actually go a bit too far. I mean, after shooting a zombie in the face, watching him slide down the side of a filing cabinet, and then creepy Jesus his way back to life to try to munch on you again, the most you usually get from one of the characters is what the hell, or an occasional fuck. Not that I wanted them reciting Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance, but a bit more environmentally connected voiceover work would have actually gone a long way for me. In total, other than one character, I really like the voice actor's work here. It helps the entire way through with tighter writing and rarely any moments where you think, man, this was written by one of those fake assistants on a questionable web page. And that brings us to music. Now, this is nice and tense like I like my horror game music to be. There's something about that discordant synth that rises up when the zombies are nearby or right after an event that elicits this tiny bit of creep factor into every encounter. The best, though, has got to be the tonal change and thump when the tyrant comes a-callin'. It's tenacious stuff that actually sinks down into the environment as his footsteps get closer and closer, and that relentlessness of his pursuit never totally goes away. And of course, every score is different for every game, and Resident Evil 2 Remake is no exception to that. But at times, it was a bit of an Alan Wake feel that I noticed that faded into typical Resident Evil vibes, and it's that tonal and tempo change that I liked here. Admittedly, there are large sections of time where no music plays to allow for the sound effects to build up and moments of tension to rise. What I liked here is that it wasn't something you could actually count on, so sometimes music would be this undercurrent prior to an event, and other times it wouldn't, leaving the ability to guess by music cues what was going to happen next quite difficult. And of course, that brings us to sound. Now, we all love the sound of a fat gobber getting snorked by a 1987 signed Andre Dawson bat. Sadly, no bats here, but there are lots and lots of knives and lots of wet sounds like a 4-star chef as a vendetta against lettuce and watermelons went out and rented an entire communal garden just so he could beat the shit out of it. And those are all excellent. Sadly, the gunshots, not so much. Really, other than the grenade launcher and the 50 caliber, the other weapons have a weak clacking sound like an angry stapler snacking through desk papers. It's not terrible, but with such an amazing sound engine, their lack of real impact left me a bit wanting, especially since the feeling of dread and desired quiet throughout the game would have been tremendous when it comes to influence if it had been interspersed with you firing off a true firearm in a hallway. That being said, the sound engine and options are second to none, and almost everything else in the game has a heavy use of sound processing to accurately reflect distance, reverb, echo, spatial obstacles, and so forth. Also, binaural sound is here. It's absolutely working for anyone who has headphones. It's instantly noticeable in things like the echo of a call for help reverberating into this large environment, not only reflecting back once, but again and again, like the voice is slowly hiding out in the corners of the room, fading out over time. This is easily one of the most accurate reflections of external dynamics affecting sound generation in a game, and if you have headphones, I would suggest you try it out. As a package, I absolutely loved the sound work in Resident Evil 2 Remake, but would have really liked for the punch of some of the main handguns to have just been stepped up a little bit. And of course, that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. You play as Leon Kennedy or Claire Redfield, as well as a couple others that you can find out about if you want, but I'm not going to discuss those here. You're trying to figure out what's happened in Raccoon City, and while both characters have different reasons for traveling to the world's worst named town, seeing it seething with zombies, and then still not turning around, don't make the mistake of thinking their stories are going to be carbon copies of one another. In fact, just like the original, but now more so, Claire and Leon both have their own tales to tell, spreading out the mythology of the current time in the Resident Evil universe with an intertwined plot, with one story focusing a bit more on the here and now, and the other bringing in the backstory, while the others later on do a good job offering little side narrative elements. Resident Evil games have always had the tact of someone writing, "I'm not a bad guy" on a wall and the blood of the person they just ate. So it's not the most subtle of tales, but each lasts about 8 to 10 hours. Additionally, you have the Easter eggs as well as other stories and additional content once you finish the first playthrough of each character. But I'm sure you're all wondering, has Resident Evil Remake changed everything up, anything up, or nothing up? Well, a little bit of all of those. First, the game has you pushing the story forward by performing puzzles, fighting foes, and just plain walking around the ramshackle interiors of many locations. And seriously, if someone ever creates a laboratory as shady as the one in Resident Evil 2 Remake, they deserve bad things happening to them anyway. And yes, inventory management is still the name of the game here, with you constantly jockeying around the assorted items in your pocket like you're searching for that one last crumb of a donut. Resident Evil games are always about big item Tetris, and while items unlock in the game, giving you more and more pocket space, there's almost no time in the title where you aren't faced with at least one panicked moment where you need some item to continue, but you know that if you drop something, it's going to disappear forever. While dropping and disappearing items are a design decision from a far gone off era, it still works in Resident Evil to add to the tension. Moving on to some of the other changes. First, the game's over-the-shoulder control scheme and free camera do allow for a flexibility and function that the prior title did not have, and while the claustrophobic feeling is still here in Resident Evil 2 Remake, it's more a reflection of good game design versus a reaction to constricted viewpoints. Then there's the combat knife. Now, this is a big Bowie-looking thing that looks like you stole it from Rambo that allows you to take out zombies, but also, when you're attacked, if you have one in your inventory, you can defend yourself from taking damage by jamming it right into their big old gaping corn eater and pushing them away to create some distance. This also works with various explosive items like grenades and flashbangs. Knives do have a limited endurance in the game though, so it's not a catch-all weapon, and if you stab it into someone and don't kill them, Well, there goes your knife, because until you finally take them out some other way, the zombie's going to have it jutting out of some sucking neck wound as they trudge around a library. Even with this change to the combat, it all feels slick. The aiming works very well, whether you have the assists on or off. And let me tell you, Resident Evil 2 Remake relishes in the almost primal enjoyment we all get from blowing the head off an already dead dude into an abstract fetish painting of a birthing canal 150 pissed off howler monkeys just walked out of. Another thing they changed was the encounters themselves. The director of the game has gone on to say that due to the title being a remake, they wanted to change up the locations of some encounters so that the players, new or old, have something they can't count on. So not only are items and weapons in some totally different locations many times, so too are the encounters. This may hurt nostalgia fans a bit, but to me it dramatically raises the playability of the game if you have any memory of the original. The only thing that Resident Evil has, that all of them do to a certain amount, is that consistent retread of old ground. It's both the highlight of the wacky way in which Resident Evil 2 Remake tells its story, as well as that little bit of travel grind that they're all known for. Also, and maybe one of the largest gameplay features to be added to Resident Evil, is the ability to use makeshift wooden planks to block off windows. And man, does it change up the feel of the game. A very real strategy begins to be employed here, as you can basically begin to understand where enemies may or may not come from in locations, depending on what ones you've blocked off. For example, you block off windows on a tight corridor, but you leave a window open on a larger section, giving you the ability to move around easier if a zombie comes in and you need to escape. It won't stop them from shambling around like a bunch of cannibal concert goers, but it will allow for you to add a little bit of strategy and movement. Despite these changes, and there are many, it is still a Resident Evil game. Expecting otherwise is like people pretending bulletproof coffee somehow magically changes what a stick of butter does to your intestines. There is retreading. You are going to hear the same stories from some people in different character playthroughs, and none of the characters will ever feel as nimble as you would expect a police officer to be. There's a couple bugs as well above the graphical ones I mentioned. For example, some locations seem locked off to zombies, which can look a bit odd. Most of them appear to be safe zones, so you don't save as some tyrant's falcon punching you into the future, just as you start smashing out your life story on a shitty typewriter someone left in a storage room. Also, there's a tremendous amount of clipping on zombies when they're trying to get through a window that you barred shut, basically treating those boards like they aren't there. When it comes to microtransactions, the store option in the game does not go anywhere right now, but I was informed it was there simply to allow a person who did not get the deluxe version of the game, which included extra clothing options for that character and items, to get them at a later time. If that changes, you will definitely see a video from me. As a package, there is a lot here. Fun factor. First, the game never skips a beat when it comes to atmosphere. I don't know what it is about having a T-103 Mr. X Tyrant slowly stomp marching behind you. There's this thunderous feeling to it, but also a tension that the character adds. It's incredible. And it's not just his design, because, let's be frank, he looks like your grandpa put on a fedora trench coat and then fell into a vat of fucking blueberry juice like Violet and Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory. For all intents and purposes, he should be the opposite of creepy, but watch him thunder through a wall or two and try to get to you, and it's not easy to argue away that the clockwork way in which he works isn't devastatingly successful to add atmosphere, especially when combined with the subtle impact he has on the playing musical tracks. This kind of expertise in design is handled all the way throughout the game. Also, the cloying screams of a zombie trying to get through a barricade or the echo of something moving on the floor above you offers a very 3D feel to the game world. So many times we see games where it feels like the moment you leave a spot, everything stops reacting. And while Resident Evil 2 Remake doesn't always get that right, but it does try to remind you at least a little bit that things that go bump in the night are usually there to snack on you. Also, the gameplay changes I love. It allows for a remake to move forward into today's gaming environment without easily having the identifiable weight of past gameplay choices holding it back. The game really delights in telling a multi-layered story where you piece together some elements and then discover more, and the puzzle continues to expand, though, as you're solving it, and just when you think you're done, boom, more stories to tell and from different locations and people. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale, with rent being replaced by deep sale on PC titles. And I gotta say, this game is absolutely worth going out there and getting right now. If you're a fan of Resident Evil, or if you're not and you're excited by this kind of new tread of an old location, I absolutely say this is worth it with the new gameplay chops, a solid amount of story, a lot of Easter eggs, and just an incredible amount of content. So anyway, that's it for me. If you guys liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you disliked it, give it a thumbs down. Maybe check out Reddit, Twitter, or Twitch. All of those are in my description. And of course, you can become a patron on the Patreon website and help me continue to give you guys reviews for games that I always end up buying a copy for, even if I get a free code from the developer. My next reviews should be out this week as well. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.